Brad, you bring up a good point with wedges. That was something that we haven't really touched on. And you mentioned gapping with wedges because they're so versatile. We might hit full shots with them. We might not hit full shots. What do you look at when you're looking at wedges in terms of what people should get into from a gapping perspective? Because I know you can't generalize it because there's so many bounce and everything. Yeah. But what should people typically be looking at when we're gapping out wedges?
So I think what your question, like some shots are full, some clubs are full swing, some aren't. Right. Like that's usually the first question I ask with guys when we're talking wedges. You know, if we're going to carry like pitching wedge, gap wedge, sand wedge, lob wedge, we'll figure out what the lofts are going to be later. But do you take full swings with all of them? Mm-hmm. You know, is lob wedge just a 20-yard and in kind of weird shot around the green club? Cool. Well, then the loft of that kind of becomes less relevant. We don't need to worry about necessarily gapping it down from where sand wedge is at because you're only going to be taking a quarter swing, half swing at the most. But let's assume the player takes full swings with every wedge in their bag, so then we treat it just like any other part of the golf bag. We need to lose that, say 10 to 15 yards and we work our way down. Usually it's somewhere between 4 and 6 degrees of loft difference is what we're looking for based off of where your pitching wedge is at. And then that should cover our yardages. And then when we get in more like your, what I call like specialized wedges, like your sand and lob wedge, where you're going to be hitting, percentage wise, way more non-full golf shots with them than you're going to hit full shots, then we start looking at, okay, what's your turf condition like? What are you hitting out of the bunker? How much do you open the face, close the face, kind of play with that around the green and have that grind conversation with the guy.
Yeah. I know the grind and bounce conversation can be difficult too, because I don't even understand some of it because manufacturers have different terminologies, different grinds, different bounce. Everything is different. There's no one set across the board of what everything is, and there's different names and there's letters. And how does someone understand what they should be looking for?
I think you should, you don't want to overdo it, right? You got to keep it simple. But you have bounce and you have grinds. Grinds are typically, when you start talking to specialty wedges, are you manipulating face angle versus playing square? Once you start
opening the face.
Yeah, are you laying that open? Are you getting a lot of lean where you're hitting those lower kind of boom, boom, stop shots? Then you're affecting your bounce. Well, grinds then start allowing you different versatility with those.
I'm going to start calling them boom, boom, stop shots.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah. You got heel and toe relief. You can start, again, this is where you start getting that really finesse kind of game. Some people don't do that. They just play it square and they're going to keep it simple. But if you start getting into those, that's when you start really looking at those other options. And again, there's never the perfect wedge. Condition changes.
Right.
You can, sand changes, like if I use it out of the bunker. So it's, you're trying to see what covers most of your areas. There's probably always an area where if it's like, if I was at St. Andrews and I could really use a low bounce here, you're never going to have that. But having the conversation and looking at where you use those shots, are you taking full swings with it, or are you using it mostly around the greens? Those type of things that a lot of wedge fitting is really, you can kind of talk through a lot.
Sure.
Because it's hard to duplicate so many different scenarios. But having those different talks and like, okay, you play it this way. Okay, well, let's try this and let's see. I think that's a lot that I find in wedge fitting too, is having a lot of conversation with the player.
Yeah. We talk about the different terminologies within each company. I'm going to put you guys both on the spot. If I came in for a fitting and I said, I don't know what bounce or grind is, how would you describe it to somebody? What is it? Why does it matter?
So when it comes to bounce, I think that has to do a lot with like how the club's getting into the turf.
Okay.
And like Ryan touched on earlier, like, do you lean the shaft a lot? Are you more neutral? So what we want to make sure we can get that leading edge down to the ball and underneath the golf ball.
Right.
So like for the player that leans that shaft a lot, that usually means he's getting a little steeper, taking a pretty nasty divot from time to time. We need to then raise that leading edge up a little bit so it doesn't want to do that, so we can make that clean contact, get some spin. So typically that player is going to play a little more bounce.
Okay.
Someone like you that's a little bit shallower, you're going to tend to lean a little bit more toward a little less bounce, because if we give you more, all we're doing is raising that leading edge, and then being shallower, it gets harder for you to get that leading edge underneath the golf ball.
I need to see the leading edge basically as flat as possible against the turf, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and then translating that into grind is more that manipulation aspect of the golf club.
Okay.
You know, like if every shot you hit is a dead square, you never open the club face, a different grind is going to do nothing for you. You're never kind of engaging that part of the soul when you go to hit the golf shot.
Yeah.
If you're the player that never hits a square face shot around the green, well, then we need to make sure we kind of eliminate as much of that soul as possible. So then we shape some off the heel, off the trailing edge, off the toe. So then when that club's laying open or you stand it up on the toe or whatever you're doing, it's going to have less drag through the turf.